Got to get all my notes out so I can have something to go by if I need to. Of course, I'd like to welcome everyone here and anybody that may be watching on the telecast. We, of course, always value your presence with us. Well, brethren, I'd like to start out and tell you about a story. I'd like to tell you about an experience I had, which is a story, back in 1972. I think I was 20 years old at that time, so back in 1972. Well, my brother and I, we did a lot of fishing together back in Miami, drifting over the deep reefs off the coast. We decided that we wanted to try this at night. We had pretty good activities during the day, so we wanted to try this at night. And our father allowed us full use of his boat, which was a 23-foot Formula, anytime we wanted. So I guess you could say we were kind of maybe spoiled. But we had full use of this boat. So we decided we wanted to go out fishing at night. And we got all the gear together and headed out. I think we probably got out there maybe half an hour before sundown. And the problem was there was a lot of weather. And we hadn't taken that into consideration. There were a lot of thunderstorms scattered all four quadrants. As the sun went down and the lightning occurred, you could see that it was a bad night. This was probably not a good idea. So we said, we need to not try this because it's too dangerous. So we decided to come into the shallower reefs, which is maybe 30 or 40 feet deep. Of course, you really couldn't see it, but we tried our best to find a place to anchor. So we anchored the boat, made sure the anchor was good and solid, and just basically hoped that none of these major storms came over us that night. So we went into the cabin and we tried to sleep. Of course, when the boat's rocking around and there's lightning all around, it's pretty hard to do that. Well, somewhere during the night, I got up and I walked out and I looked on the bow, and there's this little bird sitting there on the bow of the boat. A little seabird, maybe about that big, about that high. And I go, shoo, shoo, little birdie. Wouldn't fly away. My brother got up and we looked at this thing. What's this bird doing here? So I said, well, Bill, I'm going to climb up there and see what I can do. So I climbed up over the windshield and got on the bow, looked at the little bird, and just started petting him. He wouldn't fly away. And I go, wow, this is amazing. I picked the little bird up. I picked him up. As I recall, he didn't try to bite me. He was scared. I picked him up. I crawled back over into the cabin. My brother laid down. I put that little bird on my brother's back, and he stayed there the whole night with us. A little bird. That little bird obviously was scared of the conditions around him, and he was, seeking relief. But what amazed me is that he actually allowed me to pick him up. He trusted me to take care of it. That's an amazing thing for a wild animal. He trusted me to take care of him, and he stayed with us all night. So, brother, today I'd like to review Romans 8:28, and I want to do it within the framework of trust, because that bird set an example. Let's turn to Romans 8:28. I'm already there, and this is scripture, of course, we know very well. We have been through this. We've read this all our lives. But I want to try to add some emphasis to it. So let's read it. So it says, and we know that all things work together for good, to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. I want to discuss the scripture and break it down into basically three parts. So first part, the beginning of the scripture says, and we know, and we know. Well, those words really, of and by themselves, should give us great comfort and reassurance, just by what they say. Three words, and we know. I looked up the word know in Strong's. 1492 is the number that it gives it. It means to see, to discern clearly, and to be sure. to be sure. Synonyms to the word know in the English language are confidence, faith, certainty, conviction, reliance, and trust. So in the place of the word know, let's insert these synonyms and just say, we can have confidence, we can have faith, we can have certainty, we can have conviction, we can have reliance, and we can have trust. In other words, to know actually is to trust. To know is to trust in something. In the physical world, we know that the sun is going to rise tomorrow morning. We don't doubt that. We don't doubt it. We don't question it. We don't even wonder about it. We don't even think about it. Okay? We just know that it's going to happen. We have absolute trust in that. Well, in the same way, and that's what I'm trying to get at, we can have absolute trust that God is control. He is in control, and He's overseeing our lives. And that's a level of trust that I think we are all striving for. A scripture in Proverbs 3:5, one we all know very well, and it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not into your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your paths." That really is the essence, I think, of this scripture, that He will direct our paths, that He's involved. So with this concept of trust, verse 28 goes, in Romans 8:28, it goes on and it says that all things work together for good. There's been a lot of discussion about that throughout the years, I'm sure. But it doesn't mean that everything we experience is good. All things may not be good, but God can ultimately use everything for good. There's a difference. There's a difference. We're all familiar with the story of Joseph in the Bible and the difficult events that he had to go through. But he kept his trust in God, and in spite of the circumstances, not necessarily always to his understanding, and that's an important key. He didn't always understand what was happening. He endured, and even though Joseph's brothers meant it for evil, it ended up good. God meant it for good. And I'm sure, brethren, we all have had difficult times in our lives. You might be experiencing something right now that's difficult. It may be hard to understand how in the world could this possibly work out for good. You might have that question. I can understand that question. I've had that question myself. I really have. Maybe you've experienced a flood. Well, I think a lot of people, well, maybe not a lot. I know some in this congregation that have experienced a flood. How about the loss of a job? I know people in this congregation that are looking for a job. A business failure. I know people that have had business failures. Unexpected death of a loved one. I know that. We've had that happen recently in our family. Health issues. Well, they're all over the place. Any number of things. You can fill in the blank. You can fill in the blank infinitum, virtually. Or maybe it was just a disappointment. Maybe it was just a disappointment. Maybe you had your heart set on something and it just didn't work out the way you wanted to or the way you expected it to. And you didn't understand why. Well, I had a considerable disappointment occur in my life. And I'm going to tell you about it, okay? I don't have this written down, so I'm going to just tell it from my head. After I graduated from college in 1977, the plan was we get married in July. I'm going to go to Miami, get a good job or a job. I come back to Houston, we'll get married, and then we'll go back to Miami and we'll live happily ever after. That was my goal, okay? And we live happily ever after in Miami. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, okay? It didn't work out that way because I could not find a job. I could not find a job other than some little piddly job that was not worth the time and effort. And it was devastating. I just couldn't find one. So I moved to Houston, and we got married. But it was never my intent to ever leave Miami, Florida. That was my home. That was my identity, so to speak. That's where I was. It was never my intent to leave there. And it was never my intent to stay in Houston. It just wasn't. For 5 to 6 years, I tried to go back to Miami. I went back looking for jobs. I did this, that, the other thing, kept in correspondence with people for a long time. It was very stressful. I know it was stressful on my wife. It was stressful on me. But I tried to go back. I just wouldn't give up, so to speak. But eventually I had to come to the realization that, maybe this is not God's will. Because it just didn't seem right. So maybe this is not God's will. My parents and my brother, and I love them all very, very much, they weren't in the church. And when your family is not in the church and maybe don't have the same values or thoughts that you have, it's going to create contentions. And there was some contention there. And so I realized that, it would have been very difficult for my wife and later with kids not to have that. But back in Houston, we had a complete supportive family. We had grandparents, aunts, uncles, and everybody was on the same page. Everybody was trying to live God's way. And that's the influence that my family had growing up. That's the influence they had. What value can you put on that? It's priceless. It really is. It's priceless. And that's what I came to see. God knew what was best for me and my family, even though I didn't know it. But He knew it. And He knows the beginning from the end. His thoughts are not our thoughts, and His ways are just not our ways. He's always looking out for our good. Brethren, when we anchored the boat that night, we were dependent upon the anchor rope not breaking. You don't want an anchor rope to break when there's storms, because the boat could go sideways and it could get capsized. But a rope's strength lies in the number of strands that are woven together, which also give it the ability to stretch without breaking. Sometimes our experiences stretch us or stress us to the limit. But God does promise that He will never give us more than we can bear. So we have to take that truth and apply it to us all the time and not forget that. All of our experiences are like the multiple strands of a spiritual rope that God is weaving together to build in us the inner strength that we need to be able to flex under the constant pulls and the strains of Satan's world all around us. And it is a difficult world to live in when you're trying to live God's way. The third portion of this scripture reads, "To them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose." We demonstrate our love to God every day. Every day, because we keep His commandments. And we are trying to do those things that are pleasing to Him. Your being here today shows that. It does. And we understand God's purpose and the calling we've been given, which is an unbelievable thing. The world does not understand this, but it's great. Romans 8:28 is a promise for true believers. For true believers. In conclusion, brethren, I'd like to read a few excerpts from a book entitled Reflections on Pearl Harbor by Admiral Chester Nimitz. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, Admiral Nimitz, who was made the new commander, flew to Hawaii to assume command of the Pacific Fleet. There was such a spirit of despair and dejection and defeat, you'd have thought the Japanese had already won the war. Admiral Nimitz was given a boat tour of the destruction wrought on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. As the tour boat returned to the dock, the young helmsman of the boat asked, "Well, Admiral, what do you think after seeing all this destruction?" Admiral Nimitz replied, shocked everyone within the sound of his voice. Admiral Nimitz said, "The Japanese made 3 of the biggest mistakes an attack force could ever make, or God was taking care of America." Which do you think it was? Shocked and surprised, the young helmsman asked, "Well, what do you mean?" Nimitz explained. He goes, "The first mistake was the Japanese attacked on Sunday morning. 9 out of every 10 crewmen were ashore on leave. If those ships had been lured to the sea and been sunk, we would have lost 38,000 men instead of 3,800. Mistake number 2, when the Japanese saw all those battleships lined up in a row, they just got so carried away with sinking them, they never bombed once our dry docks opposite those ships. If they had destroyed our dry docks, we would have had to tow every ship back to America to be repaired." Mistake number 3, every drop of fuel in the Pacific theater of war is on top of the ground storage tanks 5 miles over that hill. One attack plane could have strafed those tanks and destroyed our fuel supply. That's why I say the Japanese made 3 of the biggest mistakes an attack force could ever make, or God was taking care of America. Admiral Nimitz was able to see a silver lining in a situation and circumstance where everyone else saw only despair and defeatism. Obviously, and I think we'd agree, Admiral Nimitz believed that God was taking care of America. And like Admiral Nimitz, we too need to remember that in situations and circumstances where we may feel despair and defeat, there is always a silver lining. Our silver lining is that we can trust God. We can be sure. We can know that we are able to rest in the security that He is in control. And because of this, we can have great hope. The little bird, brethren, trusted in me that stormy night to take care of it. Just as we can trust God to take care of us. He is the anchor to which our spiritual rope is tied, and He will always work all things together for our good.